broadcast network, AFTERBUZZ TV. Over 20 million weekly downloads in over 150 countries, and your number one source for after-show entertainment. AFTERBUZZ TV, the destination for TV superfans, producing aftershows for over 300 of your favorite TV shows, interviewing celebrities and showrunners, and bringing you behind-the-scenes exclusives. All thanks to E! Entertainment's Maria Menounos, producer Kevin Undergaro, and internet leader Akamai. Now, let the buzz begin!
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to another Reign After Show here on AfterBuzz TV, Season 3, Episode 3, called Extreme Measures. Oh man, what a slight departure from recent form. We didn't get England tonight, and various other people. Greer, we haven't seen her in a bit, but nonetheless, we see a lot happen. We get a wedding. Speaking of weddings, Keaton is actually attending her final wedding of the year, so she will be back after that. And we do have another co-host who will be also joining, apparently after November 6th, because that's when the show comes back. This week will be a hiatus for it. That is also attending a wedding. So, and of course, the wedding in this episode, I'm referring to Lola's. So a lot to discuss there. Now, I know some of you guys have questioned, Keaton in the past of, sometimes she doesn't show up. I will remind you, don't be so quick to throw her under the bus, because there were times last season that I couldn't make it, that JB and Keaton held it down. So, you know what? We are a family here, and I love when I get to discuss with them the episode. But at the same time, if they're not here, I love talking about it with you, the audience at home, whether you're watching and or listening. So thank you for joining in, and thank you for loving the show as much as I do, if not more. And most of you guys gave good feedback about Gil last episode coming on, and we hope to have more guests for you in the future as well, so that way it isn't just me or even just the host, but also our friends like Jonathan Keltz. Let's open up with him. So here's Laith, and he has kind of a good line in this episode saying, "I've fallen for a woman above my stature before. I can't go through that again." Not word for word, but nonetheless. So yeah, I really like Claude's reaction to this, because she's had people in her past and whatever else, and they've only loved her because she's perhaps a princess, for the most part, from season 2 to now, Claude has grown up quite a bit, I will say. So it's really fun to see in that way, and kind of how she's maturing. And this could have been a very typical scene as well, in the sense that Laith could have said what he did, and Claude could have just been upset, and it would have been fine that way. But the way they managed to go that extra step, where again he in some ways basically slips up, or not slips up, but you get what I'm saying, that he actually has feelings for her, and she's confirming what she already knew. And so we'll see how she kind of takes it. But obviously the gift that she gives him, with the shirt, and the way she's kind of almost disappointed when she couldn't protect him when Antoine and those guys came, it didn't help. Obviously the mud, right? The mud from the horse and all that, and just how disappointed she was, perhaps, where she was like, "Ooh, sorry," but she obviously loved getting him the gift and wanted to see it with him, and she's already making plans with him. And also to note, just going back to the reaction one more time, in the past, Claude, I feel like, would have reacted so differently, but by saying, I should have knocked first, it's both a sign of maturity, but also just showed how sad she actually was in that moment, because she was just accepting the fact that, maybe she was naive, maybe she was stupid, and that this was sort of inevitable, and she shouldn't have let it happen on her end. So, and because we'll talk about Narcisse more, and obviously Prince Charles, but the fact that she was just applauded by Narcisse for having saved Constance's life. She's on cloud nine, and that's why she goes there. She wants to share the feeling, and however you want to interpret that, with Leith, and obviously it just wasn't to be. But I kind of like where this is going. A lot of interesting scenes. Gil joked about it last episode, but they really like Jonathan Keltz on the show as a person, and so he's being written into some interesting stuff that perhaps otherwise wouldn't have made sense if they didn't like him that much. Certainly, he's a good-looking guy. They have him take his shirt off multiple times tonight. So for you ladies, I think that was for you. So anyway, but that's the story of Leith and Claude, and I am enjoying where it's perhaps going. I think he deserves it. Ultimately, will it be Greer? That we haven't seen her, so we'll find out. But I think he should, in some ways, stick to what he said, not from a spiteful sense, but from the sense that, if this is what he believes, then I think, he deserves better. And, maybe from that perspective, it shouldn't be Claude, because, going back to the point I opened up with, she is above his stature, but that doesn't mean they can't have a romance. And so I don't know. We'll ultimately find out, but obviously they are falling for each other. So I think that's very. It's fun to see. All right, so let's talk about Charles, because now the rest of the storylines. Well, actually, let's take a quick step back, because Charles opens up the door for all the storylines that are kind of intertwined. So let's start with Bash, and as Gil said, he's the one whose storylines always take him kind of outside the castle. Luckily for him, he doesn't have to trudge the snow just yet. Perhaps they're saving that when Canadian winter hits, and they can have him explore it that way, and have it really be cold, which is probably a funny prank on Torrance, just always putting his scenes out there. But I digress. So, sort of these strange murders of dealing with the supernatural continue, or whatever you want to call it, and obviously there's the suspicion of Delphine and what her involvement is. And tonight, the woman, she, much like the other victims, her heart was about to be ripped up, but miraculously it doesn't happen, and she survives. And so it's confirmed in this way that it is indeed a man. Now, we've been there before, where whatever it is, right? Man, beast, human, not human. So who ultimately knows? But it'll be interesting. I think in some sense, this is a storyline that I like to see a little bit wrapped up sooner than later. They're going after Delphine. They're going to try to catch her because she can kind of predict perhaps what the next target is going to be. Now, this is slightly into predictions, so if you want to tune out for maybe 1 second, by all means. It's not a spoiler, but it is a prediction. Delphine, she appears in next episode, and she's there to help Francis. It seemed like. So we'll get her, and whether or not this storyline gets put on pause by having to deal with Francis, we'll see. So it's kind of interesting. Definitely interesting. I mean, further than that, in terms of what it is, I have no idea. One of the things it certainly doesn't affect the primary storyline. So unless we have another outbreak like the Black Plague, it's not of too dire a concern. It's more just, as they say, local news. So we'll see. But even but at the very least, it's kind of interesting in this way that Bash, he's obviously bound by his duties towards this and protecting and doing these various things, but part of it could be, I'm fearful that he may miss a moment when Francis and Mary need him the most, and in some ways he's obviously been trying to help in that regard, especially with when Antoine comes and everything else. He, especially with that, he feels directly responsible for kind of the situation that they're all in now. Obviously, Mary feels more directly responsible for that situation, and rightfully so. I don't think anyone can really argue that, but it's going to be, the more Bash's time is divided between, his what his normal job's supposed to be and what his duties to his brother as a family member are. We'll see. I think one might slip up at some point, because I don't know if he can both require, and that's why I think ultimately he'll choose Francis, who's his brother, because the rest of the stuff, as important as it may be, it has time to be dealt with. It's not good that people are dying, no, but at the same time, there's other people that can step up to try and handle this, and he can still be the ringleader, but just from the castle. With the exception of seeing this woman, he's really sort of been hands off to a large degree. So we'll see. All right, so let's talk about Charles. The whole theme since seeing Charles back in has been his manhood, right? His growing into becoming a man, and certainly it's interesting kind of how we sort of open up his interaction in this episode when he's talking with Mary, and don't worry, I'll produce an heir with you, and things of that nature. And obviously that involves sleeping with your brother's wife, and how, so I think he's trying to talk the talk, but at the moment he's not walking the walk. And as soon as it starts to get serious, not that he gets taken off track by Constance and wanting to kind of be with her, and as Mary points out, so he lied to us, he basically stole the opium, and he almost killed her. He's not making good decisions, and no, he's not. And even in the last episode, this episode is a continuation of what happened last episode, where he was going to go in over his head, and in that one, directly disobey Francis and Mary. And today he didn't necessarily disobey anything, but he did lie about it. And it would have been a very sad time. I was worried for Constance, as everyone should be. And I really like, the same way that Francis applauded Narcisse, I applaud Narcisse in that way too. And not only for what he said to Charles, that was great, but then also, telling Claude, who obviously that history isn't the greatest to begin with either, but she had the wherewithal to say, in order to save this girl's life, something that ironically I've been brought into, and despite being accused of having done opium before, which was obviously very insulting from her perspective, I'm going to instead just come up with a solution regardless of my feelings, because we have to help this girl. She doesn't deserve it. And so that's how Narcisse is brought in. And so when he says to her, good job, she's alive because of you, it was a very touching moment, and it's episodes like this that are just so tough to take in, because there's so much to talk about with Narcisse. There's the wedding, and there's these moments, and which obviously were the catalyst for allowing Francis to decide that, okay, Narcisse can be good enough for Lola. And yet we have all the information from last episode that it was actually Narcisse that was responsible for all of this. And the fact of the matter is, we'll talk about Catherine in full respects. However, when she comes out and she says, I'm back in Francis's life, therefore I'm back in yours, you got to figure it from Lola's perspective, because she, the case may not be that Lola's life is necessarily in danger. We'll kind of, that remains to be seen. She certainly wasn't given the best look, so you can't draw judgment from that. However, Lola has it 10 times worse, because she's now received, to her knowledge, death threats via dead rats with letters in their mouths. So when you have it from her perspective that this is the way she looks at Catherine, how is this going to play out, knowing we know that it's Narcisse? And so the fact that he manipulated this entire thing, and I don't think Lola's wrong. He's not disingenuous, especially with what he did in tonight's episode, and there's moments like that. But you can't just have a side to you. You got to be the whole of you, and the whole of Narcisse is not 100% pure. So eventually it is going to be interesting to see if the truth comes out about how the courting actually happened, and how Catherine, while she may obviously dislike them and try to do something, it wasn't actually her to have done the rats. And we'll see how Lola takes that. I don't think it's certainly not a good start to the marriage. They're behind the 8 ball on that one. So interesting indeed. By the way, I would love to know your guys' opinion on Charles in general. I know I went from the Charles to the Narcisse, but just to quickly recap Charles, it's going to be interesting to see how he reacts. And the fact that he did tell Francis, it's a step towards maturity, but it's not any act of heroism. My belief is, there's a great David Foster Wallace quote. True heroism or freedom, whatever you want to call it, is what you do on a daily basis in a myriad of petty and unsexy ways. So, the fact that Charles did this one time and told Francis, which you could also consider from the perspective that, had he not told, I'm sure Francis would have found out, and then therefore Charles would have been punished. So it's not really, you don't necessarily have to look at it as a sign of change within Charles, and that perhaps is going to be the greatest problem. And also let me know what you guys think of, last we saw Charles, he was a young kid, and now, the timeline perhaps doesn't make ultimate sense, but it's TV time, and so now we've seen Charles as a young boy, and while he's still young, he's certainly, I would consider him a boy, but he's not. Again, the timing of it doesn't quite align, but it is what it is. Now, obviously, we'll talk about the marriage, but we'll talk about it from the perspective of Mary and the decision that she makes with Francis for potentially the Spanish alliance. Now, Catherine in this entire thing, what's most interesting to me is that any given episode, her head could be on the chopping block, and her window to kind of maneuver within is always so thin, and yet she always manages to do to utilize it in the best of ways, and to the point that now she does, she achieves what she wanted. And but the end of her, when she doesn't go to the right where the queen is supposed to sit, she sits on the left side. Well, left if you're facing them, right? Obviously right if from the sitting position. I don't know. There's that smile, and there's that like she'd finally gotten what she wanted, which is ultimate control, and not just to be in the background. And she's proven what she does with power, and it's not necessarily the greatest of things. And I don't know if it can always be deemed for her family, but this certainly the way it plays out is she is able to help her entire family. And she has that moment where she says, of Mary, that Mary can have her moments. And I think that's a very genuine moment of a respect towards Mary, and the fact that perhaps there is a deep down, despite everything, a certain love that she has towards Mary. But as soon as she gets on the throne, I think that to a degree becomes washed away. And it's really, it's kind of, I don't know who you can attribute the events of tonight. I mean, all things played out in a sense equally, where Catherine did her bit with the English ambassador, if you will, but then the way Francis took on his role and what he did, obviously in sort of with Antoine, and then the way he spoke to Nicholas in the hallway, and just was unafraid of dealing with England. And now finally word is going to spread that Francis is ill and not doing well. So we'll kind of see how that plays out. Because he just took it head on. And obviously with Mary's speech, I would attribute more of this to Mary, but I'm curious as to you guys, who's responsible for lack of a better term, saving the day? Was it Catherine, that if it wasn't for her, none of these pieces would have been in motion? Or was it really Francis now being a king, and you can attribute it to him being a dying king where he has nothing to lose, and so he'll do anything? Let me know. I'd love your opinion on that regard. All right, so speaking of Antoine, here comes Antoine, and as he says, he just wants Conde's safe passage, and in exchange, they'll kind of be good. He'll take away his alliance with England, and obviously Mary says, no, you have to also give up the throne. This was a very good scene, because in many ways, I'm sure Mary's struggling internally with, because she's had this brought up now by Catherine in certainly this episode, but throughout the past, of that you're directly responsible for this. And to an extent, obviously Catherine blames Mary for Francis's health, and so that can't weigh easily on you. But now to also see, because what Antoine says is unreacting as Mary was in that moment, it is all true. And so history weighs heavily upon her, but nonetheless she stands her ground and does what she needs to do. And so obviously Antoine wants only Francis. So I enjoyed how this really played out, because the politics of all were so fast in all of this, of then Nicholas saw the opportunity, and so he said, hey, you know what? And by the way, it says a lot of Antoine, just how he reacted to the proposal of forget your brother. You could be the king of England, or not England, I'm sorry, of Navarre, and eventually France, and you could lay your claim to France. And obviously that had an appeal. Now, we don't ultimately know what perhaps Antoine's decision was going to be, because obviously he never was able to make it. It was sort of made for him. But yeah, when Mary says to Francis, all those moments culminate to that speech from Mary that it's never been the alliance that's protected Scotland, it's been you, and with you the alliance dies, and perhaps Scotland and France will be dying, because we have a dying king. And I thought that was a very good speech because even us as hosts, and I've seen it with you guys as fans, just based on the comments that you guys have written in the past. How Francis was as a leader came into question. Is he going to be? And obviously he has a big heart and things like that. But he's no King Henry, and while King Henry wasn't, he was kind of a ruthless leader. He did what needed to be done, and people were asking that question of Francis. Yes, he'll have a kind heart and whatnot, but can he do what's necessary? And you have to wonder. Well, it's kind of unfortunate in this way, much like Charles was dealt with this tonight. Sort of sometimes when you're forced into this, in the sense that you have no choice but to do something, and you kind of see the damage that it can do. It perhaps whether it's indecision or just the wrong decision, you start to get better at it. And I think Francis, now that there's no greater catalyst in that regard than death. I mean, we all know that we have immortality, but if we knew specifically that we had X to do, or X amount of days under which to sort of live, then yeah, everyone's perspective changes, and we do only the bare essentials that we 100% need to, and get rid of the fluff, which, from a philosophical standpoint, is actually, a decent way enough to live. But obviously, I'm not saying that everyone should have only a few days to live. What I'm saying is, with that idea of just doing what's 100% of the utmost importance. But anyway, and part of that, interesting, Francis is really fighting with time to get all these affairs lined up, and I think he's done a fairly good job of it. I really do. Obviously, the biggest question mark up until this point remained Mary and how he was going to deal with her. And so I feel like, after tonight's episode, things are aligned in a really good place. And it's interesting. Yeah, Mary's speech to him, that was just one of the greatest scenes. And I'm glad they're also now with this, even though time is shortening for Francis, he's enjoying these essential moments. The dance tonight. I like how they kind of did an instrumental version of "Stay With Me," and she's leading the dance. And she says to him, she even uses the words, "Stay with me," at the moment of the song that those lyrics are supposed to hit. I thought that was a good little bit of music, and especially a song that right at this moment is very popular. So kudos to Reign on that. They always do well with music, and they always do well with party scenes, but the combination of utilizing all those techniques to build that scene, I thought was just brilliant. And towards the end, he says, because she's having these oranges that he wanted to eat with her. He delivered, and obviously, he wanted to actually do these things, but the gesture nonetheless is sweet by Mary, and but even sweeter is his reaction. I don't care about those things. I just want to be with you and spend moments with you, and that's what they get to do. So it's going to be interesting, and it's also interesting how he sort of accepted this fate onto himself when rather than marry Charles, she finds out that Don Carlos of Spain is right now secretly looking for a bride, and so why not marry? Spain has the best sort of navy at around this time, so that could be a great alliance, and it also solves the Catherine problem of no longer will Mary be a threat to France. And that's what this has sort of been all about. Now, whether or not that's true and how it'll fully line up. I mean, one of the things I thought about tonight as I watched the episode was the fact that even though Catherine and Mary aren't the greatest of friends and certainly have been enemies at portions of the show, it's always easier to sort of maintain someone when you can see them on a daily basis. Now, how their relationship and how things would play out ultimately if Mary is away from France, that remains to be seen. It'll be interesting to see, for sure. But I don't think that'll happen for perhaps a little bit. It still remains when Francis will die. I don't think it'll be next episode. I think, but at the same time, I used to think that perhaps it would be more towards the season finale. I don't think that anymore. I think they're going at a rapid pace, and I think they will get rid of him sort of a little bit earlier. And I think what they could do, I don't know if they will, use techniques with kind of keep him on the show where you sort of have memories of Mary's and that she had with Francis, and in that way, and she'll always kind of think of him that way. So it'll be interesting to see where it really ultimately ends up. And finally, the wedding. I've touched upon Narcisse, but here's Lola and Narcisse, and they get married, and it's a very joyous time. But Mary skips away to kind of set this plan in motion, or at least review it. And as mentioned before, I actually like Narcisse and Lola together, but at the same time, you always have to be skeptical of Narcisse, and especially now, I wonder how it's going to really turn out, because it's definitely going to be interesting. So that about wraps up the episode. If there's anything that I perhaps missed, that of course there's 800 small moments that play so well on the show, but in terms of the broad strokes, I think I hit everything, and that's what the comment section is for. Go comment, and we can get into specifics that I didn't get to discuss with you guys, and we can talk about it there. Or I honestly, and I will admit this, I don't necessarily partake in the conversations all the time. I try to if I can, but I do read them, and I like seeing what you guys put into it. So don't be discouraged that you don't think people, or perhaps I know other people read it, but definitely if you don't think that we read it, we do, even if I personally don't necessarily respond. So please continue that. And by the way, subscribe, rate, comment. It's the number one thing that you can do to show your support. And the last being, just spread the message that we're here. If you have friends that watch Reign, let them know that we're out there doing this thing every single week. We enjoy it, but the reason we can enjoy it is because we've got you guys as fans, the hundreds of thousands of fans that listen to this stuff, and watch it collectively. It's just a blast. It really is. So, thank you. Before we get into Castle Corner, which I have a fun castle free tonight. I picked one from Scotland, so we'll see that in a moment. We've got some unfortunate news and gossip about Reign.
AFTERBUZZ TV News.
So it's sad, but we're seeing a lot of reports that that Reign's ratings are getting lower and lower. But the problem is, it's on a Friday night, and it's tough, and so that's where you guys are. I really hope you guys continue to watch the show, support the show. Let's get people on board. I know a couple of people that sort of got caught up to the show via Netflix or Hulu, and now are finally getting there. So if you're hearing this but you're not caught up, I don't necessarily know why you're listening to the after show. However, for the small percentage that perhaps might be, watch the show, obviously, or tell people to watch the show. That's really what this is all about. We don't want to see the show go off the air, so please keep it coming. Let's do this. Support this show. It's a good show, and I think obviously I would like to see it continue. I would like to see it continue beyond just season 3. So anyway, that's your news and gossip. It's not the greatest of news, but news nonetheless. So now let's get into Castle Corner, one of the fun segments on the show. So, as I said, the castle that I'm doing is from Scotland. I figured we haven't necessarily done too many of these, and that's where we're fighting to protect Mary. It's all about Scotland, and so there's a castle called Tantalum Castle, and it's near North Berwick, Scotland, and so where that is, it's kind of up. It's on the coast, towards kind of the middle. We do have the pictures that we're showing. If you're watching the video, you'll see a map of it and whatnot. Right now we're looking at the actual castle, right? So it was built in 1350, around there, by William Douglas, who is the first Earl of Douglas, and it was in use until 1650. And right now it's mostly ruined. It's on the I said it's literally on the coast, right? And so right now it's not necessarily in the best of shape. It's made out of stone, but it still does exist. It's located 5 kilometers east of North Berwick. It sits atop opposite the Brass Rock, looking out onto the Firth of Forth. It's the last medieval curtain wall castle to be constructed in Scotland. It comprises a single wall blocking off the headland, with the other 3 sides naturally protected by the cliffs. And as I mentioned, it was built by William Douglas, the first Earl of Douglas, and he passed it on to his illegitimate son George Douglas, later created Earl of Angus. And despite several sieges, it remained the property of his descendants for much of its history. It was besieged by King James IV in 1491, and again by his successor James V in 1528, when extensive damage was done. Tantalum saw action in the First Bishops' War in 1639, and again during Oliver Cromwell's invasion of Scotland in 1651, when it was once more severely damaged. It was sold by the Marquis of Douglas in 1699 to Hugh Dalrymple, Lord Berwick, and the ruin today is taken care of by Historic Scotland. So there you have it. That's a little bit of the history. There's a couple of photos that we went through of, there was one that displayed how it looked and where it's located, and obviously pictures of it, some aerial views and so forth. So if you're just listening, I'll post one. You can always look it up on Google. Tantalum is spelled Tantalon Castle, or I'll post a picture on my Instagram at PD Svitek, so you can check some of that stuff that way if you're not watching. So let's get into predictions.
And now, your AfterBuzz TV predictions.
So we're taking a week off. I think partly, it's the eve before Halloween, so we won't be back until November 6th. Now, it'll be interesting because this is the episode where Francis isn't doing too well. Is he going to die in this episode? I don't know. My prediction is no. I think at least we might have for one more episode. And it's just one of those things. I think a lot of things are going to come to a head. We have to kind of go back to England, especially with how Catherine sort of blackmails Elizabeth in that way to get the info. Yeah, it'll be interesting because obviously that will remain a point of contention and how it's going to be fully played out. Delphine comes back. We'll see how that plays out. So a lot of interesting stuff at work, and Lord help Lola once she finds out about Narcisse, and the fun storyline of Reign for me right now that obviously isn't too deep, but that's why I call it the fun one, is definitely Laith and Claude. She's really growing on me, and I like seeing her. So that's the episode. Thank you guys for joining in yet again. Be sure to follow Keaton, support her. She will be back, and we will have another co-host to welcome. So I can't wait to introduce her to the panel. In the meantime, follow us here at AfterBuzz TV, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram. We have 2 weeks to talk about everything that's happened in this third season. So let's do it. Let's dive deep. And don't forget, rate, comment, subscribe, and we'll see you after November 6th. Have a good Halloween.
From executive producers Maria Menounos, Kevin Undergaro, Phil Svitek, and the entire AfterBuzz TV staff, we would like to thank you for listening to the AfterBuzz TV network. To watch or listen to other after shows and post comments or questions, be sure to visit AfterBuzzTV.com. I'm Sir Richard Wentworth, and this has been a presentation of AfterBuzz TV.
Buzz you later.
The views expressed herein are those of the hosts only and do not necessarily reflect the views of AfterBuzz TV or its owners or principals.